I think the core thing about the Ekklesia, or the understanding within the Ekklesia that makes it unique, is that it is to fully collaborate with God's nation building agenda. And whilst it is doing that, it will find itself in a fit for purpose position. It won't find itself in a position of being mothballed. And I think that it's interesting because,
Hello and welcome to Unlock the Kingdom Within You. This podcast explores the profound truth about what it means to be born into the kingdom, not a religion. On this podcast, we challenge the religious and denominational norms which shackle us from expressing the liberty of Christ by exploring the kingdom, the Ekklesia, and citizenship. If you're born into the kingdom but lost in religion, then this channel is just for you. So thank you for listening and don't forget to subscribe.
I certainly think one of the things for me, which I think will be an empowering thing that a knowledge of an understanding of the Ekklesia does, is I think one of the core things it will provide is, it will equip citizens to actually begin to design their citizenry. And I think that that's something that's really important, because throughout Scripture, when we see God as a nation builder, we don't see a situation where it's just God imputing upon people the way they should think, live, and behave. It's not an outside-in operation. That's never been the objective. It's been a collaborative, come let us reason together to effectively create and innovate a particular way of life on the earth. And when we look in the Old Testament and Exodus in particular, we recognize that the reason why there is the imputed element of it from outside in is simply because of the hardness of the hearts of the people and the idolatry of the people. But that's never God's intention. And I think the key thing for us is that the spirit within the Ekklesia will be one in which it will equip citizens to say, I can actually work with the Lord to design the citizenry. I can innovate. I can creatively become the expression of the citizenship of heaven on earth in a diverse way, just by understanding some basic principles. And I think that'll be very empowering, because I think one of the things that has disabled us through religion and denominationalism has effect been the clergy laity divide. And in fact, it's created an environment where, unless you're at the front, unless you're on the pulpit, unless you are in particular positions, you are constantly left disempowered. Whereas within the context of the Ekklesia, the citizen is the one that is empowered to be the change.
Yeah. That
God empowers directly to be the change and to, as I've always said, you are the line in the boundary line of the kingdom, and it's through you that the kingdom either expands or decreases. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be an exciting thing when we think about communities of the future. And you mentioned it, Tim, about the expression of influence. Well, that influence starts when citizens see themselves as citizens and see their creative and innovative capacity to design citizenry within the rudiments of the authority, law, and government of the kingdom. I think that's going to be especially for our younger generations coming up, that's going to be something that I think they will embrace. And we can't say that if we look at the kingdoms of the world around us, we look at the nationhood around us, we know that designing citizenry is something that people struggle to get involved with, simply because they're being encouraged to be active, but the design of it is often is in the strength and powers of the few, who control the decision making of how that's expressed. What's your thoughts, Ivan? Would you like to speak into that? The creative capability in the Ekklesia to design citizenry.
I think Charles brings up a really important point all the time, and he says that context is really, really important, right? So I agree that the Ekklesia will look different in different parts of the world because the context dictates what the practical kingdom reality looks like in that particular country, in that particular nation, in that particular region, neighborhood, block, family, and I believe that God knows what is needed in a particular region or in a particular nation, and He knows what the ecclesia needs to look like, and the specifics of the governmental structure, the authority that He wants to exercise in that realm. I mean, there's so many practical examples of this. I don't know how kingdom specific this example that I'm going to bring is, but the president of the country of El Salvador is a Christian, and he calls himself a Christian, and he's decided that he's going to basically go after all the highly volatile and highly violent, the largest violent gangs in his country, and he's basically authorized the police force, to arrest all those who are connected to this particular group of people and put them in jail, and it has reduced murders by a significant amount. And he would say, I am exercising my authority as a follower of Christ to really bring calm and to bring quiet and to bring justice to this country, so that no woman, child, or person is afraid of going out in the street and doing the things that that are being killed because of these crazy things. Now, whether I'm still discerning whether this is really a kingdom value or this is more flesh and looking for affirmation as the new president. He's a young guy. He's good looking. He's got a good stage presence, and so but his pinning himself to being a Christ follower and pinning himself to saying, I really want to protect families and I want to create a calm country, has brought the eyes of many, many people outside of the nation to look at what he's doing in El Salvador. And some are saying, this is what we need to be doing in our country, and this is what we need to be doing in another country, and tying that activity to a kind of a kingdom value. Now, does the Ekklesia, as we're describing it, take on that role and express itself in the same kind of way, or is there a different function for the Ekklesia in El Salvador, let's say? I don't know. I just asked that question given that example.
Well, I would expect, I mean, going off the basis of what I said earlier, I would expect that. I think that one of the challenges at the moment is when we look at existing church communities, the boundary lines of expression vary, but sometimes are very limited. So in other words, how much we influence the world around us is dictated by the boundary line of salvation, for example. So, our goal is to essentially get people saved. What they're saved into isn't our concern. In fact, the limits to that is just to bring them to church. That's half the time. That's the purpose.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, within the context of the Ekklesia, the goal is to design and implement and innovate a form of citizenry that is expressive across all of life. Going back many, many years, ministers at least had this idea that they were responsible from their flock from the cradle to the grave. And it was this idea that it wasn't just the service, their provision of their service was in terms of raising their flock into society, into the existing society, and working with that. But within the context of an Ekklesia, it's broadened out, because it's no longer just the minister that has that objective. It's the citizen.
Yeah.
That's their primary objective. So I think that I think that this knowledge of having the creative and innovative capability, that it is my responsibility to manifest a citizenry that at its heart will have universal values and understandings, whether it's at community level or wider than that, regional level. But then I have to own that responsibility, which is what active citizenship is about. I have to own that responsibility to be loyal to my king, knowledgeable about his law, honorary of government, as well as participating in it, recognize my duties, responsibilities, and privileges, and be resourceful as a citizen. All of those things contribute to designing my citizenship.
Yeah.
And expressing that citizenship, that it both has equal value in the Ekklesia as a whole, corporately, as well as individual value. I think that type of expression is different to what you mentioned about the president, because I think with the president, he's seeking to impute upon his nation his values, but the mechanisms within that nation are not theocratic values. They're not theocratic structures or institutions. So, it sounds to me a little bit like Christian nationalization taking place. Less a nation growing up within the context of another nation, a state within a state, which is what the Ekklesia is, and having that type of influence. But I think you raise a really good point that we need to get that clear right from the get-go, how that works, so that we don't end up imputing our values on a nation that really can't live up to those values because it doesn't know God. And even though there might be a period of time where those values and laws work, because there always will be, and we've seen it for many countries that have been influenced, have Christian influence, we should never find ourselves in a situation where we think a high level of Christian influence equals a Christian nation. And that's what's happened in the UK. There we have many Christians within the context of politics fighting for this, what I would consider to be is it El Salvador, the city, the city of gold, is this idea that the UK was once a Christian nation. It's an elusive vision which never really existed.
Right.
But
Same
you're hearkening back to that. Yeah, you're hearkening back to that and trying to establish a new form of Christian nationalism, which I think is fundamentally fraught with issues, and also harkens back to Constantine's vision, which had nothing to do with Christ.
Where, as this president of El Salvador, I want to throw this in right quick. You said he was good looking, so he must resemble me some. But anyway, that's another story. But when you talk about him rounding up all the bad guys and throwing them into jail, I agree, Fred, that sort of smacks of Christian nationalism and sets them up for the reverse of someone getting into office and saying, we're tired of all the Christians and we're going to do the exact same thing. So it sort of sets that sort of a scenario up. And yet at the same time, I had to recall, I cannot remember his name, as you might have heard of the series Transformation. One brother went in and he prayed through these various cities and brought forth a major prayer initiative, and the same outcome was that bars were closing, and not only bars were closing, but arrests were down. I mean, to the point that it had a major impact on the area. He wasn't an official that was going around having people arrested. He prayed, and the hearts of people were changed to the point that there was an impact, a very tangible impact on the area, which is a lot different from being in an office and having the power to go out and arrest who you don't like. They may be very much bad guys, but to be able to go out and arrest those individuals and throw them in the jail simply because you have the power to do so.
Right.
I think that's why the Ekklesia has to understand that its authority comes from its king and not from civil government. I think we have to be very careful, because in this country we have a lot of that. If people had the license to do so, they would be doing some of the very same things that this guy is doing over there. Anybody who opposes what we believe and doesn't think is right, we'll lock them up, or we'll do this or whatever. And I think that's a dangerous precedent, and I don't think it lines up. I see the Nation Builder Summit as one of those points of entry to start building some of the capacity for proper kingdom dispensation in the earth. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think one of the things for me that definitely must be addressed, and you touched on it, Tim, is if we understand that the Ekklesia is its own government of citizens who have civic responsibilities, which are unique to being ambassadors to the King of Kings, then how we express that will uniquely reflect itself in the world in such a way that people will be able to identify that we are a nation of wise and understanding people. And I harken back to that because one of the things I've got an AGM coming up in our community, and the emphasis, the subtitle or the theme is citizenship by design, and the text is actually that text in Deuteronomy. It's saying that, look, if your citizenry is of a certain quality, people will know it, and they will naturally seek for the authority of that quality, and they will naturally point to it. And I think that this is, for me, where it's such an important point about, I see in the future, I don't see whilst the Ekklesia stands out right now, because it's necessary that it stands out, because it must do, is a distinction between itself and the church. That thing which is a distinction must be worn in such a way upon the people that, and become such a part of the people, that it's no longer necessary to be distinct in the same way. As in, because as you know, one of the challenges we face is amongst those who are understanding the Ekklesia is, rather than it being effectively, rather than it putting on flesh, it becomes a label which is used as a distinction.
Yeah.
And I think that God has never, I mean, from the point of Jesus, the word being made flesh, the reality is the gospel has always been designed to be a living epistle. And in that regard, we should have that same aim with the Ekklesia and any revelation that comes out, that it becomes a living epistle rather than a label that is worn, or a place that people point to.
Right.
So I think, again, when I'm thinking about communities of the future, I'm thinking about a people that don't wear it, but as a result, live it out, reflect it, walk in it. And so they are identified as it. I don't get the impression, when you get into the book of Acts, they were known as the people of the way. It was much later on that they were called Christians, which was actually a derogatory statement. It was never one of where that was celebrated. But you don't see people in the early phase of the New Testament, even the gatherings being called Ekklesia per se. Rather, it's the people. The way that it's termed is the Ekklesia in this region, the Ekklesia in this home. So in other words, it's not a label, it's saying the citizens. You could interchangeably say the citizens in this home or the citizens in this region and area, which again speaks more about the nature in which they assembled rather than the way that what they were called.
And also their functionality, right? Charles brings up the Acts incident of the disciples being able to speak in the different tongues for the different folks that were in the city of Jerusalem during the Passover. And God enables the Ekklesia to be functionally relevant to the people that are surrounding the expression of the kingdom at that moment in time. So for us, we have to be very careful how we bring definition to what the Ekklesia is, because God isn't interested in our definitions. He's interested in accomplishing his agenda, his mission in a particular moment in time, and he will use those yielded citizens to accomplish what it is he wants to accomplish in that particular point in time.
And I think sorry, go ahead.
It's kind of crazy for people sitting there on the outside listening to all these different people speak these different languages. Again, they accused him of being drunk at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and saying all kinds of crazy things. And other folks said, no, something particular and unique is going on here, and I need to pay attention. Those are the people who are being drawn into the kingdom. We're always going to have this distinction, right? There are going to be people who are drawn into the kingdom, and there's going to be some who are going to be repelled by the kingdom. But that's all up to God to decide.
Yeah, I think the core thing about the Ekklesia, or the understanding within the Ekklesia that makes it unique, is that it is to fully collaborate with God's nation building agenda. And whilst it is doing that, it will find itself in a fit for purpose position. It won't find itself in a position of being mothballed. And I think that it's interesting because, when again, when I'm sure you'd agree, Tim, that we know that throughout the New Testament, the term church is not there, it's ecclesia that's used, but it's also still used in the context of the book of Revelations when Jesus is saying, I will take my light from it. In other words, if it fails to reflect my kingdom and my nation building agenda, then I will take my light from it. I will not continue to accept its failures in not reflecting the citizenry of heaven. And if it continues to allow if it continues to allow itself to be under the rule of the states around it and begin to reflect that, then it's an apostate position as far as the Lord is concerned. And I think that that's something that we also have to bear in mind, because we are amongst many circles arguing for the case of distinction for the ecclesia, but we also need to, in reverence to God, recognize that distinction has with it a awesome responsibility that Jesus certainly doesn't play with.
Yeah,
I think when you mention the ecclesia in the book of Revelation, I think it's very unique that you would bring that up, because when you really take a look at it, just from the very raw understanding of the first century of what the ecclesia was, this body of believers from a secular side that could legislate, they could confer denied citizenship, they could make policies. These are things that they could do. And so when Jesus used that term, a lot of that would have been floating around in the minds of those when he said, I'm going to build my version of this entity that you're really familiar with. So it had a function. It had things that was supposed to be doing. There were very specific things that people understood about them. Now, when you get to the book of Revelation, and it rightly said there, that if you're not doing those things, if you're not legislating, if you're not conferring or denying citizenship, if you're not setting policies in accordance with the kingdom, if you're not binding and loosing in accordance with the kingdom, then you're irrelevant to my agenda. You're irrelevant to what I need to have done in the earth. And so therefore, he said, I love you, but I have something against you. And now I have to either correct that or you're useless. And that's what, and again, it wasn't like a denominational name he was giving them, the one in Philadelphia or Sardis or any of those places. It was saying, you know who you are by design as an ecclesia. Be who you're supposed to be. Do what you're supposed to do, because in each of those things that he had something against, it shows where their deficit was. It showed what they had failed to do as a result of them being this entity, this ecclesia in that area. So we have to, again, I like the idea that we have to be very careful not to create labels. I mean, I have friends who they're treating ecclesia like another house church. We got a little group over here. I have, look at all my little ecclesias. That's it's almost to the point. This almost sounds against what I teach all the time. It'd almost be better not to even be able to say the word, but do the thing. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
But I realize right now that there has to be this intro place, for at least from the people that the Lord is sending me to get them to at least see the difference. But then as they mature, understand that it's not about being called, an ecclesia over here or there, but it's about becoming those who are doing the things that Jesus intended when he said, I'm going to build my version of what you understand the ecclesia is here in the first century.
And that's why, I'll come back to you, Ivan, in a sec. I think that's why for me, in looking at that future, I have, there's certain things that I've instrumentally done within our community, like, for example, not having ecclesia in any of our material or the things that we are speaking about when it comes to the community. I just simply say we're a community, because I want us to, if we can see that the Lord himself has prescribed the way that he wants his people to be viewed by the nations, And that view is based on being a wise and understanding nation. And it goes back to what Ivan said about the practicalities of how we live amongst ourselves and amongst others, and how we behave and demonstrate in life. Then actually, and I go back to where Jesus talks about there are people who say there's the kingdom and here's the kingdom, and no, the kingdom is within you. In other words, and then another example for example, where Jesus despised the way that men would sort of broadcast their praying and their fasting.
Yeah.
All right, and he would then talk about men going into the secret place, and that's where value is added. Yeah. There's something to be said, both individually and corporately, where we take that understanding and we value it, and we recognize that for the Lord to exhibit anything on the earth that it expresses a lack of understanding to the people at the time is very unique. And I take Pentecost because we talked about that. It's a very unique expression, but it's very deliberate and doesn't go against the grain of his desire as an authority to bring people personally into his presence. And that is really important to him, and he protects that. And we see that throughout the Old Testament, how much the Lord as an authority protects his presence, and whilst provides a lot of grace for people to access, requires a lot of respect for people to access in the access. So I think it's an interesting one. I'm going to land on the last question here on this particular topic, which was, how do leaders lead in this current transition? I think that's a really important, and that's towards the future, the future type of communities we see. How do we lead? How do we? And I know, Ivan, you touched on it a little bit. First of all, in addressing titles over functions, and correcting that. But do you want to sort of expand a little bit on that, Ivan? Because I think that's so important as part of this kind of leadership that needs to emerge.
I think recognizing that as leaders, not everybody is a follower, because everybody is in a different place in their journey. Some will want to stay where they are. Tim, you've identified 4 different categories of people. Folks that are comfortable where they are, they have no interest in changing, they just want to stay where they are. So if we as a leader think that we have any leadership capacity with that group of people, I think we're delusional. I think there are those who are beginning to be curious and who are having questions, but they basically bury those questions because any effort to put into bringing those questions and verbalizing those questions in their current context will be frowned upon. So they value more their connection and their membership in that particular group than actually the questions that are emerging. And then there's another group that's verbalizing the questions, but they're doing it more in private. They're doing it with people who they trust. And as leaders, we have to discern where people are so that we can operate functionally. I think the functionality of the fivefold in eldership is about discerning where people are and what kind of conversations are they ready to have about where they are in their journey. Whether that means that we're standing outside of the system that they're in, but they're coming to us and kind of broaching and testing us about whether they can have these conversations with us or not, or they're full on ready to have these conversations because they've decided they got to leave that context and they got to move into the unknown. I think we need to be there at all those stages, and I think our effort to respond to the people, depending upon where their stages are, is going to be different. I can remember one example. I have a good friend who left kind of the traditional denominational structure that we were part of, and another friend who we know basically said, until you're fully out of that system, I don't want to have another conversation with you. And he said, I'm going to send you this literature. Read these things, and when you're ready to have a conversation about those things, then you and I will have another conversation. But until you've done that, and until you fully left, I don't want to have another conversation with you. So that was discerning the person that he was talking with, the person's readiness to move to the next station as they migrate out of a system that's ineffective into the kingdom. So that functionality, again, is really important. Also discerning how much energy and time we put into having conversations with people because we've discerned where they are in this journey.
Thank you for joining our fireside talk about the kingdom. My name is Frederick Tobin, and I hope this podcast has been a blessing to you. If you'd like to continue to receive fresh insight into the kingdom, click the notification bell to follow us. For further information about the kingdom, visit our website, www.unlockthekingdomwithinyou.com, to download your free ebook. See you soon.